Hello everyone, this is Manas Patidar, currently pursuing Masters in Information and Technology from IIPS DVV Indore. This video has been made under the guidance of Dr. Nitin Nagar sir, and the topic covered under this video are TCP/IP client socket, URL and URL connection. So let's see this topic one by one. The objective in this video covered are Introduction to TCP/IP socket, TCP/IP client socket API, what is URL class in Java, constructor and method of URL class, URL connection class in Java, and methods of URL connection class. So let's see this topic one by one. What is TCP/IP socket? TCP/IP sockets are used to implement reliable bidirectional persistent point-to-point stream-based connections between hosts on the internet. A socket can be used to connect Java IO system to other programmers that may reside either on the local machines or on any other machine on the internet. There are two kinds of TCP/IP sockets in Java. One is for server and another is for client. Server socket class is designed to be a listener, which waits for a client to connect before doing anything. Thus, server socket is for servers. The socket class is for clients. It is designed to connect to the server socket and initiate protocol exchanges. The creation of socket object implicitly establishes a connection between the client and the server. TCP/IP client socket API. The socket class represents a socket client. We use the class to make connection to a server, send data, and to read data from that server. The following steps are applied for a typical communication with the server. The client initiates connection to a server specified by hostname or IP address and a port number. It sends data to the server and using an output stream. Read data from the server using an input stream. Close the connection. The step 2 and 3 can be repeated many times depending on the nature of the communication. Let's understand this with a program. Here we have created a client class provided by hostname, domain name, and a port number. We have created a socket object provided with an input stream input and output stream. Through buffer reader, we will read the input. And here we get our output. In the output, we will get domain name, registry domain ID, registrar who is server, registrar URL, updated date, creation date, registry expiry date, registrar mark monitor, registrar IANA ID. Now proceeding towards our next topic, Java URL class. Java URL class represent an URL. URL is an acronym of Uniform Resource Locator. It points to a resource on the World Wide Web. For example, this is a website on your screen. A URL contains many information. First, protocol. In this case, the HTTP is the protocol. Second thing is server name or IP address. In this case, you can see our IP address. Now port number is also provided and also the file directory name. In this case, index.jsp is the file name. Now, constructors and methods of URL class. First, URL string space creates an instance of a URL from string representation. Second, URL string protocol, string host in protocol, and string file creates an instance of a URL from a given protocol, host, port number, and file. URL string protocol, string host, import, string file, URL stream handler, and handler. It creates an instance of URL from the given protocol, host, port number, file, and handler. URL string protocol, string host, and string file. It creates an instance of a URL from a given protocol name, host name, and a file name. URL. It contains URL context and URL spec. It creates an instance of URL by pressing the given specification with a specified context. URL. URL context, string spec, URL stream handler, and handler. It creates an instance of a URL by pressing the given specification with the specified handler within a given context. Now, methods of URL class. Public string get protocol. It returns the protocol of the URL. Public string get host. It returns the host name of the URL. Public string get port. It returns the port number of the URL. Public string get file. It helps in fetching us the file from the URL. Public string get authority. It returns the authority of the URL. Public string to string. It returns the string representation of the URL. Public string get query. It returns the query string to the URL. Public string get default port. It returns the default port of the URL. Public URL connection, open connection. It returns the instance of a URL connection that is associated with this URL. Public boolean equals. It compares the URL with the given object. Public object getContent. It returns the content of the URL. Now URL class in Java. Features of URL connection class. URL connection is an abstract class. The two subclasses HTTP URL connection and jar URL connection make the connection between the client Java program and URL resource on the internet. With the help of URL connection class, a user can read and write from any resource referenced by an URL object. Once a connection is established and the Java program has URL connection object, we can use it to write and read or get further information like content, length, etc. Void add request property. As argument, we will pass string key and string value. It adds a general request property specified by key value pair. Void connect. This method helps to open a communication link between the resource referenced by the URL if such a connection has already been established. Now, boolean get allow user interaction. This method returns the value of allow user interaction field for the object. Int get connection timeout. It returns the setting for the internet timeout or the connection timeout. Object get content. It retrieves the content of the URL connection. Now, this is the example from which we will understand. In this example, we have created a demo class. We have passed or given a URL name, which is google.com, and print it through protocol, and also provided the host name and port number, and also we can fetch the file name. In output, you can see easily the protocol, which is HTTP, host name, that is www.google.com, port number, by default it is -1, and the file name is the URL class. Thank you.